Senator Fifield.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. The bill which is before us today seeks to impose a compulsory student amenities fee, that is, a compulsory levy for university students for non-academic services. Now, this legislation is really based, I think, on a complete misapprehension of what voluntary student unionism is and on a complete misunderstanding of the effect of the Howard government's voluntary student unionism legislation. Now, I want to make it clear at the outset what the Howard government legislation did not do. The Howard government's VSU legislation did not ban student unions. It did not ban student associations. The Howard government's legislation did not ban the collection of fees by student unions. It did not ban the collection of fees by student associations. What the VSU legislation did is that it prevented the levying of compulsory fees, that word compulsory fees, for non-academic services. The VSU legislation ensured that membership of student unions and associations was no longer a prerequisite for university enrolment. We used to have this ridiculous situation where a non-academic service, where membership of a non-academic organisation was a prerequisite to undertake academic activities. It was a ridiculous nexus, and it was one which the Howard government broke. And the effect of this legislation, far from being the doom and gloom and catastrophe presented by those opposite, what the legislation did was it put money in the pockets of students. It allowed students to decide what services they wanted to support and which organisations they wanted to join. That's all it was about, putting money in students' pockets, giving students the choice, respecting the right, the capacity and the ability of students to make their own decisions. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, why is it that we think university students possess the critical faculties to decide which university to attend? They possess the critical faculties to determine which degree to undertake. They possess the critical faculties to choose the subjects right for them. But for some reason, those critical faculties depart them when they're faced with the decision as to whether or not to join a student union, whether or not to join a student association. Their critical faculties depart them when it comes to determining whether those unions or associations are offering value for money for the services that they provide. We are of the pretty simple belief on this side that students' critical faculties don't depart them. That if they can make those important life decisions, which uni to go to, which degree to take, what career to eventually embark upon, surely, for heaven's sake, they've got the capacity to work out what's value for money. Now, this legislation before us represents an election commitment which Labor have previously tried to break. The 2007 election, the then opposition promised not to reintroduce compulsory student unionism and not to introduce a compulsory amenities fee. A question was put by a journalist to the then Shadow Minister, Mr Smith. Are you considering a compulsory amenities fee on students? Smith: no. Well, firstly, I am not considering a HEX-style arrangement. I'm not considering a compulsory HEX-style arrangement, and the whole basis of the approach is one of a voluntary approach. So I am not contemplating a compulsory amenities fee. Stephen Smith, Shadow Minister for Education and Training, 22nd of April 2007. 22nd of May, sorry. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, the amenities fee proposed by the government today is the same proposal which was put forward by student unions and sports unions as an alternative to the Coalition's 2005 VSU legislation. And what Labor is seeking to do with this legislation is to circumvent the intention of the Howard government's legislation by having the university act as the collection agency for a compulsory fee rather than the unions and associations collecting that money. Now, students will not technically be compelled to join a union under this legislation. Students would, however, be compelled by a participating university to pay a fee equivalent to a union fee, which would then be passed to the union to be spent by the university itself on services that the union previously provided. The effect is the same. It really is just a technical workaround the Coalition's legislation. Now, the reintroduction of a compulsory fee has been supported and championed by student unions since the implementation of voluntary student unionism in order to underwrite student unions who have been unsuccessful in attracting members. Now, our colleagues opposite put the question, why not a compulsory fee for non-academic services? Well, our response is pretty straightforward. If unions and associations provide the services that students want and need, then students will willingly join those organisations and use those services. There are many service organisations in the community. There's the NRMA, the RACV, who provide a valuable service, but they're not granted the capacity to compulsorily levy motorists for fees, nor is any other body given the authority to levy fees on their behalf. People are convinced that NRMA, RACV, they provide a good service, it's worth signing up, it's worth paying the membership fee. Why should it be so different on campus? Now, the argument that I perhaps have the least amount of time for in favour of a fee for non-academic services is this idea that student unions and associations are somehow a fourth tier of government, and that therefore they should have the capacity to compel fees for non-academic services. It's the taxation argument. Well, it is the role of federal, state and local government to provide the safety net for all Australians. There's no carve-out which exempts universities. That's why we have governments, is to provide the safety net for people. We don't need student unions and student associations to present themselves or see themselves as some fourth tier of government. Let's be clear. Financially stretched students, and students are financially stretched, are not assisted by being levied a compulsory fee. It is not an act of kindness. It is not something that will help them. The best way to help struggling students, the best way to help their budgets, is to allow them to keep more of their own money. And that comes down to a fundamental difference between this side of the chamber and the other side of the chamber. We believe individuals are in a better position to know how to spend their money than someone else is. On the other side of the chamber, they're of the belief that there's always someone else who knows better how to spend someone's money than the individual themselves. Now, the argument which is often mounted and has been canvassed here today is that compulsory fees are needed to provide services such as childcare, counselling, sport. Well, the truth is such services are often more conveniently accessed by students off campus, particularly for part-time students, particularly for external students. If students have more money in their pockets, they can contribute those funds directly to the service of their choice, whether it be on campus, whether it be off campus, whether it be close to home, whether it be close to their place of work. Let them make the choice. Don't have someone else make that choice for them. Let them spend their dollars where they want to put them of greatest convenience to them. Now, the government has, I must acknowledge, conceded that paying a compulsory fee will be hard for students. The government has therefore proposed a loan scheme. The government's proposing to put students into debt to pay for a compulsory fee they can't afford. So if you do that, you kind of have to come up with some loan scheme to help the students who you put in debt in the first place. Now, those opposite often draw analogies with HECS. Well, it's not relevant. HECS is a scheme which is designed to partially fund tuition. The proposed compulsory fee is not for academic services. And I'll revisit. Mr Smith, who also said before the 2007 election, "I certainly do not have on my list an extension of HECS, either voluntary or compulsory, to fund these services. So I absolutely rule that out." Well, I actually think that was the first election commitment that the current Labor government sought to breach. It does indeed. Now, I fibbed before, Mr Acting Deputy President. I said that the argument that student unions and associations were like a fourth tier of government was the argument that annoyed me most. But I fibbed. I did fib, I must confess. The argument which really, I think is the most belittling to students, the most condescending, is that a compulsory amenities fee is needed to ensure a vigorous campus life. Well, give me a break, Mr Acting Deputy President, if you will. I kind of think that if you've got young people, clever people, curious people, energetic students, you don't need a compulsory fee to ensure a vigorous campus life. You know, young, clever, curious, energetic students. I just let you in on a secret. Put people like that together, maybe even throw in a keg, you're going to have a vigorous campus life. You don't have to have a compulsory fee to generate that. And some opposite have never left, I think, Mr Acting Deputy President, the university campuses. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, assurances by the government that money will not be used by student unions for political purposes are completely meaningless, and for the reason that funds are fungible. Every dollar that's passed through a student union by a university administration frees up a dollar that the union already had to then redirect for political purposes. Funds are fungible. It doesn't matter which particular accounts, which particular dividing lines you have between accounts. A dollar that's raised here frees up a dollar somewhere else to be spent on a political activity. So the argument that this doesn't help the political activities of student unions, which most students have no interest in, is completely fallacious. Mr Acting Deputy President, the passage of the former coalition government's 2005 Higher Education Support Amendment, abolition of upfront compulsory student union fees bill, did help lift a substantial financial burden for students in Australia. For the first time, it did empower students to make their own decisions about the services they needed, and it did enshrine freedom of association on campus. And the results were not surprising. Student unions, bereft of the power to force their members to pay their fee, had to radically cut the cost of membership and tailor their services to the demands of students. Thanks to VSU, students at campuses across Australia saved hundreds of dollars every year, which they were able to put in their pockets and spend as they see fit. And I did mention money wasted on extreme political campaigns, Mr Acting Deputy President, but ultimately this debate was never about whether student unions promoted left-wing causes or right-wing causes. I mean, student unions should be free to engage in whatever political activity they wish, but provided their membership and funding base is entirely voluntary. That's what we call freedom of speech. And to many, these changes did seem long overdue. After all, compelling Australians to join a representative organisation against their will was regarded as objectionable in every other part of society, and workers long ago won the right to freely associate, and today no government, well, maybe not this government, but most governments wouldn't even think of making union membership compulsory in the workplace. But for some reason, university administrators, the Australian Labor Party, believe that student unions should be the exception, and that for some reason the services that they offer, the value they provide to their members was so high that students had to be forced to join them. And as I've said before, if an organisation offers value for money, it has nothing to fear. If an organisation offers the services that students want, they have nothing to fear. They will have members they will succeed. Mr Acting Deputy President, Labor do plan with this legislation, as it says, on or after January 2011, to slug Australian university students with a new tax of up to $250 per year. It will rise annually with automatic indexation, and students will be struggling. And the policy is a clear breach of commitment, something which we are becoming extremely familiar with this particular government. Mr Acting Deputy President, the idea that this is not a return to compulsory student unionism is nothing more than a con and a sham. Students can choose, sure, they can choose under this package not to belong, but they've still got to pay the fee as though they were a member of the union. Mr Acting Deputy President, I want to quote a former National Union of Students president, David Barrow, who said, "Universities get the fee, students get the services, and student unions get screwed." That's his view of what the current government is proposing. But in reality, he was doing, back when the consultations took place in 2008, what any good unionist would do, making an ambit claim. Student unions are secretly delighted at being able to again levy a compulsory fee, despite the fact that they say that this isn't adequate, that this is still lousy legislation. But ordinary students cannot afford this, and nor should they be forced to put their hand in their pocket to give the money to the institutions as a mechanism to pass the union on to student unions. Mr Acting Deputy President, the group that tend to get forgotten in the debate of university fees are the part-time students, those who work several days a week to support themselves, who in many cases will be charged the same as wealthy students living in college on campus with family support. You've got mature-age students with young children who may only ever attend campus for classes. They will pay the same. Or you have students who study off campus, online or at a small regional branch of the university, who will be slugged the same amount as students who can easily access the services on the main campus. In fact, it's these students who need the support the most who will be hit by these fees. Those students who struggle financially, often they don't have the time to enjoy the benefits of union funding of a club or a society. They don't have the time to attend the free lunchtime beer, take advantage of the barbecues or the band sessions. Those who have the time, those who have the financial security to do so, hardly need other students to subsidise their experience. Mr Acting Deputy President, this bill, in one sense, it's a relatively small matter. People often say, you know, why on your side of politics do you get so excited about this legislation? What really turns on it? What really turns on voluntary student unionism? Well, partly the explanation is because it's a relatively small thing, that's why it matters so much. Because if a government can't protect freedom of association, if a government can't protect freedom of speech, if a government can't protect the right of an individual to keep their own money in their pocket in a university environment, if government can't do that in what is a fairly small area of public policy, then what hope do we have to expect government to protect those things in the wider community? Mr Acting Deputy President, this is bad legislation. The former Howard government did nothing to obstruct a vigorous campus life. It did nothing to obstruct student unions. It did nothing to obstruct student associations. All it did was usher in freedom of choice. The freedom to belong to or not to belong to a student union or association, the freedom to keep your money in your pocket and choose the services of your choice if that's what you wanted. This legislation seeks to remove that freedom of choice. This is bad legislation. It should be opposed. and on this side of the chamber, we will always stand up for freedom of association. We will always stand up for the right of an individual to join or not join.